What began as a standard promotional appearance exploded into Hollywood's most shocking on-air confrontation in years. Last night, the entertainment world was rocked when Tom Cruise walked off the set of Jimmy Kimmel Live after an exchange that crossed every professional boundary. The studio lights seemed brighter than usual on the set of Jimmy Kimmel Live last night. The audience buzzed with anticipation as they waited for Tom Cruise, who was scheduled to promote his latest action blockbuster. Production assistants scurried around making final adjustments while the band played an upbeat tune that did nothing to hint at the tension that would soon engulf the studio. Kimmel sat at his desk, reviewing his note cards with an unusual intensity. Those close to the host later revealed he had been dealing with declining ratings for weeks, and network executives were pressuring him to generate more viral moments. Perhaps this explained the glint of determination in his eyes as he prepared to interview one of Hollywood's biggest stars. When Tom Cruise finally bounded onto the stage, the audience erupted. He flashed his trademark smile, waving enthusiastically as he made his way to the guest chair. He high-fived members of the band and performed a brief dance move that delighted the crowd. It was vintage Cruise, energetic, charismatic, and completely in control. "Tom Cruise, everybody," Kimmel announced, standing to greet his guest with what appeared to be genuine warmth. They shook hands and Cruise settled into his seat, straightening his perfectly tailored navy suit. "It's great to be here, Jimmy," Cruise said, his voice carrying that familiar confident cadence that had charmed audiences for decades. "Great to have you," Kimmel replied, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "You're looking good for a man who's been in the business for, what is it now, 40 years? Cruise laughed good-naturedly. "Almost. It's been an incredible journey." "Speaking of journeys," Kimmel said, leaning forward slightly, "your new movie, Horizon Break, opens this weekend. I've seen it, and I have to say, the stunts are insane. You're still doing your own stunts at your age? That's brave." Something flickered across Cruise's face, a momentary recognition that Kimmel's comment carried a barb, but he recovered quickly. "I've always believed in giving the audience authenticity. When they see me hanging from that helicopter, they know it's really me up there." Right, Kimmel nodded, his tone shifting subtly. "You're known for that commitment. Commitment seems to be a big theme in your life, wouldn't you say?" The audience quieted, sensing the conversation veering into unexpected territory. Cruise maintained his smile, though it had lost some of its wattage. "I'm committed to making great films that entertain people, absolutely. And to certain organizations?" Kimmel pressed, raising an eyebrow. The studio temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Cruise shifted in his seat. "I'm here to talk about Horizon Break, Jimmy. It's a film I'm incredibly proud of, and the whole team worked really hard." Of course," Kimmel interrupted, holding up his hands in mock surrender. "But you can't deny that people are curious about other aspects of your life. For instance, I was reading about your relationship with David Miscavige recently." The camera caught the exact moment Cruise's expression hardened. The audience fell, completely silent. "I'm not here to discuss that," Cruise said evenly, his voice carrying a warning. But Kimmel, perhaps sensing a viral moment in the making, continued. "I just find it fascinating how some people can compartmentalize their professional and personal beliefs. How do you reconcile working with actors and directors who've been openly critical of—" "This isn't what we agreed to discuss," Cruise interjected, his famous intensity now focused entirely on Kimmel. "I respect that you have a show to run, but there are boundaries." Kimmel leaned back, a slight smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "Boundaries? That's interesting coming from someone whose organization has been accused of not respecting people's boundaries for decades." Gasps rippled through the audience. The showrunners in the control room exchanged panicked glances, wondering if they should cut to commercial. Cruise set his jaw. "I think you're crossing a line here, Jimmy." "Am I? Or am I just asking the questions your carefully managed press tours never allow?" Kimmel shot back. Your PR team vets every interview so thoroughly that no one ever gets to ask about the elephant in the room. This isn't journalism, Cruz replied, his voice steady but cold. This is ambush entertainment at my expense. Entertainment? Isn't that what we both do? Kimmel countered. Entertain people? Sometimes with stories that stretch credibility? The tension between the two men was palpable now. What had started as subtle jabs had evolved into open hostility. The audience watched in stunned silence, many filming the exchange on their phones. You know what, Jimmy? Cruz finally said, sitting up straighter. I've respected your show for years. I've come here multiple times to promote my work. But this, he gestured between them, this isn't respectful. It isn't professional. Professional? Kimmel echoed, doubling down rather than de-escalating. Let's talk about professionalism. Is it professional to refuse to work with actors who've criticized your beliefs? Is it professional to have network executives receive calls from your representatives whenever someone in the industry says something you don't like? Cruz's face flushed with anger. For a man known for his controlled public image, this visible display of emotion was shocking. You have no idea what you're talking about, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. Don't I? Kimmel pressed, sensing blood in the water. Tell me, Tom, when was the last time you spoke to your daughter, Suri? Does your commitment to certain ideologies override your commitment to family? The silence that followed was deafening. Even Kimmel's loyal audience seemed to hold their collective breath, aware that a line had been irreversibly crossed. The comment about Cruz's family, particularly his daughter, had struck a nerve that no public relations training could prepare him for. Cruz stood up slowly, his hands clenched at his sides. The consummate professional was clearly battling to maintain his composure, but the hurt and fury in his eyes was unmistakable. We're done here, he said, removing his microphone with deliberate movements. Kimmel, perhaps realizing too late that he had miscalculated, attempted to backpedal. Tom, come on, sit down. We've got more to discuss. No, we don't, Cruz replied, his voice steady despite his evident anger. You didn't invite me here for a discussion. You invited me here for an ambush. As Cruz turned to leave, Kimmel made one final attempt to salvage the situation, his tone suddenly conciliatory. Tom, wait. But Cruz was already walking away, his back straight, his steps measured. The audience watched in stunned silence as one of Hollywood's biggest stars headed for the exit, leaving Kimmel alone at his desk, the smirk long gone from his face. Behind the scenes, producers frantically signaled for a commercial break. As the studio lights dimmed, the gravity of what had just transpired began to sink in. What no one knew yet was that the confrontation was far from over, and that the worst was yet to come. In the brief reprieve of the commercial break, chaos erupted backstage. The show's executive producer, Melissa Chen, cornered Kimmel before he could retreat to his dressing room. What the hell was that? She hissed, her clipboard clutched so tightly her knuckles had turned white. We cleared all the questions with his team. There was nothing about Miscavige or his daughter on the list. Kimmel loosened his tie, a sheen of sweat visible on his forehead despite the studio's aggressive air conditioning. Ratings, Melissa. You said it yourself last week. We need moments that get people talking. Not like this, she countered, glancing nervously toward the guest green room where Cruz's security detail had formed a protective barrier. Through the narrow opening between two burly men in dark suits, she could see Cruz pacing, his phone pressed to his ear. Meanwhile, the audience sat in uncomfortable silence, exchanging glances and furiously typing on their phones. The confrontation was already spreading across social media like wildfire, clips being shared before the show had even resumed. He's on the phone with his publicist, a PA whispered as he rushed past. And I think I heard the word lawyers. Kimmel's facade of confidence began to crack. He'd gambled on creating a viral moment, but he hadn't anticipated Cruz's reaction or the potential fallout. The network executives would be calling any minute now. "Get him back out here," Kimmel instructed, straightening his jacket. "Tell him I'll apologize on air." But before anyone could approach Cruz's entourage, the star himself emerged from the green room, his expression unreadable. The commercial break was ending in 30 seconds. "Places, everyone," the floor director called out, panic evident in his voice. Kimmel returned to his desk, arranging his notes with trembling hands. The band began playing, but the music couldn't mask the tension that hung in the air. To everyone's surprise, instead of heading for the exit, Cruz walked back toward the set, his movements deliberate and controlled. The red light on the camera blinked on, and suddenly they were live again. "Welcome back," Kimmel began, his usual confidence noticeably absent. "Before we continue, I want to—" But Cruz didn't return to the guest chair. Instead, he remained standing, just at the edge of the camera frame. "No, Jimmy," he said, his voice calm yet carrying an undercurrent of steel that silenced the host mid-sentence. "I think I should speak now." The audience erupted in surprised murmurs. This wasn't in the script. This wasn't how these shows were supposed to work. Cruz had effectively taken control of the broadcast. "You know," Cruz continued, addressing not just Kimmel but the audience and the cameras, "I've been in this business for almost 4 decades. I've done hundreds of interviews. Some tough, some easy. That's part of the job." He took a step closer, to Kimmel's desk, and the camera operator scrambled to adjust the frame. But what just happened here wasn't an interview. It wasn't even entertainment. It was a calculated attempt to humiliate me for ratings. Cruz's voice remained measured, which somehow made his words even more damning. "And you brought my family into it?" Kimmel attempted to interject. "Tom, I think we got off on the wrong—" "I'm not finished," Cruz cut him off, his tone leaving no room for argument. The audience let out a collective "ooh," sensing the power dynamics shifting before their eyes. "You've built a career on being the funny guy, the prankster," Cruz continued. "But there's nothing funny about ambushing guests with personal attacks when they've come here in good faith to promote their work. There's nothing amusing about using someone's children as ammunition." The studio had fallen into absolute silence. Even the band members watched with wide eyes, instruments forgotten in their hands. "You crossed a line tonight," Cruz said, now looking directly at Kimmel, who seemed to physically shrink under his gaze, "not just with me but with basic human decency. And I think everyone watching, here in the studio and at home, sees that." The camera caught a close-up of Kimmel's face, which had turned an alarming shade of red. Whether from embarrassment or anger was impossible to tell. "Tom," Kimmel tried again, his voice hoarse, "you're right. I went too far, and I apologize for—" "An apology crafted by your legal team during a commercial break isn't what this is about," Cruz interrupted. He turned to face the audience directly. "This is about a culture where humiliation is packaged as entertainment, where crossing boundaries is celebrated if it generates enough clicks and views." Several audience members nodded in agreement, and someone in the back actually applauded. The sound was jarring in the tense atmosphere, but it seemed to embolden Cruz. "I came here tonight to talk about a film that hundreds of dedicated professionals spent 2 years creating," he said. "These people, stunt performers, camera operators, set designers, costume departments, they deserve better than to have their work overshadowed by cheap shots and tabloid tactics." Kimmel's producer was frantically signaling from the sidelines, drawing her finger across her throat in the universal sign to cut the feed, but the cameras kept rolling. This was television gold, even if it was at their host's expense. "We've worked together before, Jimmy," Cruz said, his tone softening. "Slightly. I've always respected what you do. But tonight?" He shook his head. "Tonight wasn't worthy of your talents or your platform." For perhaps the first time in his career, Jimmy Kimmel seemed genuinely lost for words. The tables had turned so completely that he could only sit there, watching as one of Hollywood's most powerful stars systematically dismantled him on his own show. "I think we're done here," Cruz said finally, echoing his earlier statement but with an air of finality that hadn't been there before. He turned to leave but then paused, as if struck by an afterthought. The entire studio held its breath. "Oh, and Jimmy," Cruz said, looking back over his shoulder, "next time you want to boost your ratings, try writing better jokes." With that parting shot, he walked off the set for the second time that night. But this time, there was nothing frantic or emotional about his exit. It was the deliberate departure of a man who had said exactly what he came to say. The camera lingered on Kimmel's stunned expression for several excruciating seconds before finally cutting away. In the control room, producers stared at each other in disbelief. In the 4-decade history of late-night television, nothing like this had ever happened. As Cruz disappeared behind the curtain, his security team falling into step beside him, a production assistant leaned toward the executive producer and whispered, "Should we call the network?" She didn't answer immediately, her eyes fixed on the monitor where Kimmel sat motionless behind his desk, the audience's murmurs growing louder by the second. "No," she said finally. "First, we need to get through the rest of the show." She pointed to a young PA. "Get him some water, and find out if the next guest is still willing to come on after whatever that was." But as the crew scrambled to salvage what remained of the broadcast, no one noticed the network executive who had been watching from the wings, her phone already pressed to her ear, as she delivered 4 words that would send shockwaves through the entertainment industry. "We have a situation." Those 4 words reverberated through the network offices within minutes of the broadcast. In a glass-walled conference room 20 floors above Los Angeles, 6 executives gathered around a mahogany table, watching the replay of what was already being called the meltdown on social media. "Kill the rest of the show," instructed Diane Reynolds, the network's head of programming, her expression grim as she watched Cruz's methodical dismantling of their star host. "Air a rerun for the West Coast feed." "Already done," her assistant confirmed. "But the clips are everywhere. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. It's trending #1 worldwide." On the table, phones buzzed incessantly with calls from other network affiliates, advertising partners, and entertainment journalists, all hungry for comments. The damage control machinery had kicked into high gear, but they were already 10 steps behind. Meanwhile, 3 floors below, in his dressing room, Jimmy Kimmel sat alone, staring at his reflection in the mirror. His tie hung loose around his neck, and the makeup that had been carefully applied hours earlier now looked waxy under the harsh lights. On the counter lay his phone, its screen a constant flicker of notifications. A soft knock on the door broke his trance. "Not now," he called out, his voice lacking its usual confidence. The door opened anyway, and his longtime showrunner, David, stepped inside. His expression said everything. "How bad?" Kimmel asked. David placed a tablet in front of him without a word. The screen displayed social media reactions, news headlines, and the rapidly dropping stock price of the network's parent company. The phrase "career suicide" appeared more than once. "Jesus," Kimmel whispered, scrolling through the carnage. "The network wants to speak with you," David said. "But first, Tom's publicist called." Kimmel looked up sharply. "And? They're not suing yet, but they want a formal public apology. On air, tomorrow night." Across town, in a private dining room at Chateau Marmont, Tom Cruise sat with his core team, his agent of 20 years, his publicist, and his personal attorney. Despite the confrontation that had occurred less than 2 hours earlier, Cruise appeared remarkably composed, picking at a salad as his team outlined various response strategies. "The public reaction is overwhelmingly in your favor," his publicist reported, scrolling through analytics on her laptop. "Even outlets that have been critical of you in the past are calling Kimmel's behavior a new low for late-night television." "We're getting calls from every competing network," his agent added. "NBC, CBS, they all want exclusives on your response. We could leverage this into— No, Cruz interrupted, setting down his fork. No leverage, no exclusives, no prolonging this circus. His team exchanged glances. This measured response was unexpected, even from someone known for his careful image management. Tom, his attorney began cautiously, we have grounds for significant legal action here. Defamation, breach of contract. The network violated the pre-approved question list. We could— I said no, Cruz repeated firmly. I've made my point. On camera in front of millions. Taking legal action or dragging this out just keeps the focus on the wrong things. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the Los Angeles skyline glittering in the night. Call Kimmel's team, he said finally. Tell them I'll accept a public apology but not on his show. A press statement will suffice. The following morning, as Los Angeles awakened to headlines dominated by the confrontation, network executives gathered for an emergency meeting. Ratings reports from the previous night had just arrived, and they painted a grim picture. We lost 30% of viewers after the first commercial break, the head of analytics reported, pointing to a dramatic dip in the viewership graph. And early numbers for today's online clips show overwhelmingly negative sentiment toward Jimmy? Diane Reynolds, who had been conferring with legal counsel all night, addressed the room. We have two options. Stand by Jimmy and weather this storm, or make a change. The silence that followed was answer enough. By noon, the network had released a statement announcing that Jimmy Kimmel Live would be going on a 2-week hiatus to reassess our content standards and interview practices. Behind closed doors, however, discussions about permanent replacements had already begun. At his Bel Air home, Kimmel drafted and redrafted his apology statement under the watchful eye of both his personal publicist and the network's crisis management team. Gone was the sharp-tongued host who had built his career on celebrity roasts and practical jokes. In his place sat a subdued man who was beginning to understand the true cost of his miscalculation. I crossed a line, he read aloud from his drafted statement. My attempt at creating entertaining television came at the expense of basic respect and professionalism, and for that, I am truly sorry. The publicist nodded approvingly. Add something about respecting the boundaries of guests and their families. As Kimmel continued revising across town at his production company's headquarters, Tom Cruise was already moving forward. In a conference room filled with posters from his upcoming film, he led a marketing meeting focused entirely on the movie's strengths and upcoming promotional opportunities. We've rescheduled the appearances on Fallon and Colbert, his assistant reported. Both have assured us they'll focus solely on the film. Cruise nodded, but his mind seemed elsewhere. When the room cleared, only his longtime producing partner remained. You handled it well, she said simply. Most people would have either exploded or retreated. Cruise smiled faintly. In 40 years, I've learned a few things about perspective. 3 days after the incident, Kimmel's public apology was released. It was comprehensive, humble, and entirely devoid of the humor that had defined his public persona. Industry insiders noted that the statement bore the unmistakable fingerprints of network lawyers, but the sentiment seemed genuine enough. Hours later, Cruise's team released their own brief statement. Mr. Cruise appreciates the apology and considers the matter closed. He looks forward to focusing on celebrating the incredible work of the hundreds of talented individuals who contributed to Horizon Break. The calm, measured response only enhanced public perception of Cruise's professionalism, while Kimmel's reputation continued to suffer. Ratings for his show plummeted in subsequent weeks, with many celebrity publicists quietly removing their clients from his upcoming guest list. 1 month later, as Horizon Break broke box office records worldwide, the network announced that Jimmy Kimmel Live would be undergoing a creative restructuring. The industry euphemism fooled no one. Kimmel had been given the option to resign or be fired, and he had chosen the former. In his final broadcast, a visibly humbled Kimmel addressed the elephant in the room directly. "A few weeks ago I forgot something fundamental about this job," he told his subdued audience. "It's not about creating viral moments at anyone's expense. It's about entertainment that brings joy, not pain." As he signed off for the last time, entertainment analysts were already writing the post-mortem on his career, with most agreeing that his confrontation with Cruise marked the beginning of the end. 6 months later, at the premiere of his next film, a reporter asked Cruise if he felt vindicated by Kimmel's downfall. "That's not how I see it," Cruise replied thoughtfully. "In this industry, respect has to go both ways. What happened that night wasn't about winning or losing. It was about boundaries. Sometimes they need to be defended." He paused, then added with characteristic diplomatic skill, "I wish Jimmy all the best in his future endeavors." As he walked away down the red carpet, the reporter couldn't help but note the contrast. While Kimmel was now hosting a low-profile podcast with a fraction of his former audience, Cruise's star continued to rise, his reputation for professionalism only enhanced by the confrontation that had ended one career while reinforcing another. The infamous episode itself became a case study in entertainment industry training programs, a perfect storm of misjudgment, corporate panic, and the enduring power of maintaining one's composure under pressure. In Hollywood's collective memory, it stood as a stark reminder that even in an industry built on spectacle, some lines should never be crossed.